Welcome back to my channel, Mindful Connections. Carrie Marie here. And today is, this segment's going to be a little bit about a little story time here, a little history about me and what I like to call my why. Why is it that I'm doing what I'm doing? And of course, this isn't the only thing that I do. I'm a photographer. I run my own photography business, as well as, I do a little bit of art and this and that as well. And how I got into my photography segment and how I got here making content is really a huge part of my story. Because everything about what happened several years ago is really ultimately what's brought me here. And it starts out, I'm not going to go into full detail on everything, but back when I was a new mom, I discovered I had thyroid cancer. I had this large tumor growing, and it affected my vocals, and they determined that they needed to do surgery because it was growing so fast it would not respond quick enough to treatment. So they did surgery, and the doctor told my family, not to expect me to be able to speak without reconstructive surgery on my vocals. Yeah, but I'll never forget the look on the doctor's face when I said a perfect hello to him the next morning. And I didn't even understand it and understand why until the next day when I talked with my husband. And honestly, I contribute that to, I said a prayer right before I fell asleep on that table as got him in your hands, because I was a new mom. I'd only been married for about a year, and I didn't know what else to say, because I was more worried for my family than myself. I didn't want them to experience life without me. And ultimately I knew that I had no control in that moment other than to be like, where am I going to choose to put my trust? And I did that wholeheartedly. And I believe that that's why my voice was preserved in that moment. So fast forward several years, and I honestly, I say it about 8 years later, I discovered that I was one of the few people that my thyroid tried to grow back, but it was functioning miserably. And, again, going through some of the exhaustion and fatigue that comes along with it. So they decided at this point in time, they wanted to do radiation treatment. And what I didn't know is the kind of trial that I would go through kind of from that starting moment on. And it was a multi-year trial. So treatment for me actually wasn't that long. So, long story short, I had my treatment, but what happened in the middle of my treatment system, or my quarantine time, is what really I had to deal with for many years after this. And that was halfway through my quarantine, I ended up having my first seizure. And it wasn't super extreme, although because I was in quarantine, nobody witnessed it, except for the fact that I happened to have been on the phone with my doctor at the time it happened. And I remember coming to and looking at my phone, and I'm like, I think I was just on the phone with somebody. And I looked, and it was my doctor. So I called them, and they said, yeah, you were on the phone with us, but you were there, but you weren't there. There was something going on. And so that was our first indication. And unfortunately, after that first seizure, I actually lost my ability to utilize my legs for the first 3 weeks. And I would say shamelessly, I mean, this, you want to talk about something taking away all of your pride that you have. This was it for me. I ended up having to pull myself because I'm not can-do person. I've always had to overcome adversities in my life, for various reasons. And we'll get into that too, because there's other elements about myself that I wasn't aware of until after this discovery process, going through this. And it was this experience that opened that up in awareness. So I actually had to pull myself around to get around for a while, until I ended up getting a walker and a cane and things like that. So what I didn't know is that I was going to be experiencing about anywhere from 10 to 20 seizures a day for about a period of 2 years or so. It impacted my cognitive ability. It definitely impacted my speech again. Not that I couldn't speak, just that my brain could not connect the words in my head to the mobility and motor functions of my mouth. Essentially, my motor functions were significantly impaired when I would have my seizures, and I lost my ability to walk part of that time too. So I had to rely on alternative means to get around. And there was a moment that they told my husband that the rate my body was deteriorating, they didn't have any answers to stop it. They were struggling to identify the actual cause of the seizures, what kind of seizures they were, and essentially they gave me about a year left to live at this current rate. So they sent us all the way from Idaho to North Carolina to go to Duke University to see if there was anything that the specialists could identify or figure out how to stop this. And as good as they were at helping me understand some aspects about my body, my brain, and everything, how it worked, they did not solve anything. If anything, they just basically said, this is how you're going to be for the rest of your life, whatever that entails. And I'm not a person to give up, and I've always been, that's one thing that I've always been grateful for, and at times wished I could fight against, because, let's face it, when you fight, you get tired. So, but I ended up going to a Bible study with my family, and they didn't know me. They didn't know my story. As far as I know, they didn't know what was really going on. They might have heard a little bit, but anyway, essentially it turned out that they ended up praying for me, because they knew it had been revealed that I needed help, and that I had no answers at that time. So I had several people pray for me. I've never experienced anything like that in a prayer for healing in my life. The warmth that washed over me, this reverence, this peace, and it took time for me to realize, but I would track my seizures, and that happened to be the last day I had any kind of full body seizures. And incredibly, I was in shock enough that I kept keeping track, just thinking, okay, it's a matter of time that they're going to come back around, because even I had a hard time believing in full healing, because I had been told so much that this was what I had to accept, and even if I didn't want to accept it, right? So, and then later on, it took about another year for my digestive system to heal, because I was severely underweight, struggling to hold enough nutrients. My body just stopped absorbing things. And so then that finally started healing. And then for years after that, it was battle. I was still battling, because through this whole thing, I had severe depression, because when you get a rug ripped out from underneath you like that, it's like your entire identity changes. You start to have to identify and realize who you are in the deepest core of yourself. And it is very challenging. So I'm human. So I went through a deep, deep, deep depression. And it felt like there were times it felt like every day of my life I was fighting for my life still, even though my body was healing. And on that, I just kept praying. I kept trusting, kept praying, kept going, not giving up. And just, I would pray that God would take everything that I experienced and do something with it to help other people. Because at this point, I knew what it was like to be in this kind of darkness, to be in this wave after wave of hopelessness. And I wouldn't say it's complete hopelessness. I mean, obviously I wouldn't have kept trying if there wasn't hope, but it feels like this pit you can't get out of. The more you try to get out of, the worse it would get sometimes. And even when I was starting to heal, it still felt like this thing that wouldn't let go. So over time, there was a moment in my prayer that God said, okay, well, I was like, God, something's got to change, because you've healed my body, and as much as, because I've discovered I have genetic conditions. I have autism, I have ADHD, I have a genetic connective tissue disorder. All of it kind of compounded together in the midst of everything that I went through as well. So some of it's just not going to change. It's going to be that cross I got to bear. And I have definitely accepted that. I've learned to thrive within that and understand it. But this is part of that journey of how I've gotten through that, right? So even if I had at that time, and this was 3 years ago now, actually about 2.5 years ago, I had gotten to this point where I'm like, okay, I can accept this. I can work with these things that aren't going to change. That's fine. But there was still something inside from this deep depression that wouldn't let go. And I felt shame. I felt sadness. I felt frustration, because despite everything that I was doing that was successful, was momentum forward, was positive, was healing, I still felt like there was something not letting go. And I could not identify what it was. So I pray and pray and pray. And then finally, when I was saying, hey, God, please, something's got to change. He's like, okay, if you're ready to do it my way, which I thought I had been doing it his way. I didn't know that there was another way. Lo and behold, he goes, okay, I'm going to move you to Texas. And I've never lived in an area, even when I was in North Carolina, I was near family. I've never been in an area where I was not close to family. And there was a part of me that was afraid of doing that and always was resistant to it. I now look at it that's kind of what he's been trying to get me to do. For whatever reasons, he wanted me to get to a space where I'm willing to move when he says it's time to move, and not to be making decisions based off of my own fears. So I didn't tell anybody about the whole, okay, I'm going to move you to Texas and that'll be the next part of your healing journey. I'm like, okay. I just trusted in it and waited. Lo and behold, my husband, he had a great job, but he had been wanting to change things up. And, there were just some answers not answered at that time. Or I should say the answer was no, until 2 months after I had this conversation with God that, oh, I got a job. Oh, that's fantastic. You get to finally transition to more of what you've been trying to achieve. And he's like, it's just one caveat. And I'm like, it's Texas. I know it's Texas. And sure enough, I'm like, yes, let's go. He's like, yeah, it's in Texas. So yeah, I said, let's go, which he was surprised because I've always been adverse to it. And likewise, he didn't want to move away from family either. So it was kind of a struggle for both of us in a way, but this was the moment where like, okay, it's time, let's do it. And so we get there, and I kid you not, when and this is something I really want to impress upon people. When God chooses to heal you, and it's not even so much a choice, He wants to heal you. When you choose to let God heal you, I thought it was going to be all sunshine and rainbows. In this next part of my healing journey, I thought it was going to be relief of all this pressure. I did not understand that it was going to be more pressure. I mean, more. And let me give you an idea of what that's like. So we land in January of 2020. We get there. We're not even there long. We ended up getting sick with COVID. I was sick for a good 3 months. And then we ended up moving into our house that we had bought. And about a week or two after that, I got rear-ended picking up groceries at the pickup station. I got rear-ended on my way home. And when I tried to go in to get medical treatment, because I had this horrible headache, I had trouble breathing, I was a mess. I got turned away from one doctor's office, 3 urgent cares, and 3 hospitals. Literally, they all told me, if you're not dying, we can't accept you because the shutdown happened. And on some level, I recognized I kind of had a little bit of a fear of being severely ill and not getting answers or treatment because of my experience in the several years prior to that. But I had never experienced it in this way. So lo and behold, it turned out I had a concussion for over 6 months. I had a rib out of place over my heart and 3 herniated discs in my neck from this car accident. And it went untreated for about 5 months before I finally found out, 6 months before I finally found out, something like that. It was a good chunk of time before we found out. That's why I'd been hurting so bad and struggling so bad. So finally I start getting treatment for these things. I was finally able to start getting into that. And the emotional, mental, psychological aspect of this whole collided dynamic really threw me for a spin, because I know the pressures that I went through during the pandemic, the fears, the frustrations, the uncertainties were definitely shared out there. I was not alone in that. But then you impact that on top of a brain that's constantly hurting. And something I became aware of is when you have things like autism or ADHD and you have a concussion, your functioning goes low, real low. Not in the I needed help. I was struggling. I'm going to be honest. I was in a low point again, and a different kind of low point, but definitely another low point. And it put a lot of stress. I developed OCD during the time, and which I have since worked through and been able to break. But it took understanding how I got there to break it. It took understanding like where I got after that. Like there was this moment when things finally started to shift, and I don't know, maybe it was kind of like the cat being cornered and deciding that they needed to fight to get out. Like I made a choice. I made a choice that, you know what, these things are going to keep happening in my life. And I have a choice of whether or not I'm going to let it take me down and bring me real low, or to even take me out, or I've a choice to, you in a sense, kind of embrace it. Not in a way of like, oh, I'm going to hang on to this illness or this condition. No, I mean, embrace the fact that you're in this moment. Take it as a learning opportunity. Take it as a moment to let yourself go through this metamorphosis and change into a butterfly from the caterpillar. Figure out a way to stop crawling on your belly and fly, essentially. And so this is why I have such a firm belief in encouraging people because one, I needed encouragement significantly. Two, making a choice and realizing that it's a choice. Also, to have the courage to deeply evaluate in complete truth where I'm at in my life, what it is I'm doing, what it is I'm not doing, and decide, well, does this line up with the goals that I have set before me? Or is there a new set of goals that I need to achieve? But the answer is never to stay the same. It's always to move forward in progression. And, and I think that, similar to the parable of the sower of the seeds, we hear about the seeds that get plucked up and stamped on and droughted out of existence and never took root. We hear about the seed that grows for a little bit but doesn't have enough roots to take hold, and all the thorns and thistles around it drown it out. And then you hear about the seeds that land on good soil and create a great and prosperous crop. Now that can be found in Luke chapter 8 and in the Bible. And really, the thing that people don't realize is that it's perfect analogy to the different seasons that we have in our lives. And on top of that, people don't realize that when you hear about the sower throwing seeds on good soil and it creates a crop, we think, oh, that's just it. They're getting to relax. Absolutely not. Because you ask any farmer if they get to sit back and relax and kick their feet up when they've got a good crop going. No. There's always new rocks they're finding in the soil they got to dig out so the rock doesn't become rocky soil. The ground doesn't become a rocky soil again. They got to water it. They got to constantly go and find make sure that there aren't weeds growing up in it to choke out the good seed. And, they have to work to maintain that good and healthy soil so that crop can be healthy. And when you get through your adversities in life, when you get through these moments, like now that I'm at where I'm at now, I recognize I've got to till my land. I got to till that soil. I got to keep it healthy. And that doesn't mean that I'm not going to have moments where the rain doesn't shine, or the sun doesn't shine, or the rain doesn't fall on my soil. That's very representative to the ups, the highs and lows in our life. And it's good to recognize and be grateful for the moments that things are easy. But it's really important to recognize when it's hard, the reality of what that really means. Because our hardships are what mold and make us. I don't think I'd be sitting here in front of a camera, creating content for you and encouraging and trying to help other people if I hadn't gone through such an immense amount of trials. And that is very much why I'm here. How can I not help somebody else when I know exactly, intimately, what it's like to feel that way, to be in that state? And I gotta tell people, there is that sunny ray of sky on the edge of that storm, on that horizon. There is a good and prosperous thing that awaits you, even if you have to till and maintain the healthy soil. And that's very encouraging to me, as well as I hope it's encouraging to you. So I just want to leave that with you today. Again, this was a little bit more of a story time segment, a little bit about my why I do what it is I do. And essentially, I just want to encourage you to live boldly, to live fiercely, and keep going. Don't give up. And if you need to reach out for help, that is perfectly okay, because even a farmer needs farm hands occasionally. because this thing of life, this thing of humanity is hard, and not every pasture is going to be the same level of work. Some is going to be so much work in comparison to others. And just remember that just because you've got a lot of work doesn't mean you're not worth it, because you are. You're worth it. Sometimes those fields that take a lot more work end up with the most rewarding of outcomes. And there is satisfaction in knowing that you did the work, knowing that you allowed for the change, that you trust in the change, and you make that choice. There is definitely something healing in that as well. So I just want to say, if you're hurting, if you're struggling, if you're in a dark patch, I want to encourage you to seek God, pray, keep going, because Lord knows that's what kept me going through it. And don't give up the fight. Never give up. All right, well, until next time.